Don, you want to play a game?
I'm always open.
Awesome. This is an average everyday wine cork. I'm going to put it underneath one of these cups, and you have to guess which one it's under. Look, it's Babe the Blue Ox. All right, which one is this underneath? One out of three. One out of three. Guess there's only one other option. Oh, thank you for playing, Don. Thank you for playing. Today we're going to talk about what happens when someone violates your trust. Don is our special guest. He's going to share a message about what it looks like to trust people, even people that have hurt you. I'm Pastor Matt, and this is Worship Anywhere.
Well, hello, all of you in Surprise Church Land. My name is Don Mosman, and I'm sitting in for Pastor Matt, giving you the sermon today, and I'm so happy to be able to help him and help our church with the message as we start to talk about ways to simplify. I'm going to be talking to you about the importance of trusting people in simplifying your life and ways that we can do that. But before we get started in that, most of you know who I am through my service on the worship team and my faith story that I shared with Pastor Matt a while back. But for those of you that haven't had the opportunity to meet me, I've lived in Bismarck for about 10 years. I've been coming to Surprise Church for about 7 years. And I have my wife, Angie, who she's out there in digital land, otherwise I'd have her stand up and wave to you. And my daughter, Annabelle, who's 21, and she's a local business owner. And she also sings from time to time in the worship band. And I was in the military for 7 years, served in the U.S. Air Force. And then I got out of the Air Force, moved to Denver, Colorado, and ultimately was a state police officer for 20 years in Denver, and left law enforcement, moved back to South Dakota, which is where my wife is from, and we sort of call our home Rapid City. And then shortly after that, I got offered a position up here in Bismarck and moved up here and been living here ever since. So I'm going to start off on the topic of trust by sharing a story with all of you. So early in my career as a state police officer, we used to have what was called team sessions. So we would take two or more officers, assign them to a section of road that had, problematic crashes or things happening, and then we would try to focus our time and attention on that given roadway for a specific period of time. And my partner for a lot of those team operations was a gentleman that we called Doc. His actual name was John. Now, the reason he got the nickname Doc is because Doc had a PhD in entomology. Here was a guy who was a professor at the University of Michigan and decided one day that career was not for him. And he sold everything he owned, packed up, moved to the mountains of Colorado, and became a state police officer. And so he came from a sort of a different background than most of us, right? My first experience with Doc is when I was in the training program, and I had been asked to go on a call with him, and I jumped in his car, and we're running, about 100 miles an hour up this county road, and all of a sudden he slams on the brakes, right? Gets out of the car. I mean, the siren are still going. He goes out of the front of the car. There's a beetle on the hood of the car. And he scoops the beetle into his hand, runs off to a bush, puts the beetle on a bush, runs back to the car, and off we go again. And I'm looking at, because this is the first time I've ever met this man. I said, what was that? Right? It just totally shocked me. He says, well, that particular beetle was rare to this area, and I didn't want to see him harmed. So that was my introduction to Doc. And so fast forward a couple years, we're doing this team op together, and I pull over a truck with a family in it. And there was a mom, a dad, and a child, and both mom and dad came back on a suspended license. They couldn't legally drive. So I'm dealing with them and figuring out what I'm gonna do, and Doc overhears the radio call. So he pulls up behind me after a little bit, and he jumps out of his car, comes over to my window, and he says, okay, so I heard that mom and dad are both suspended. I'm assuming you're gonna give them a ride into town. I said, yeah. He says, well, what are you gonna do with their truck? I said, well, we'll park it here. They can arrange for a licensed driver to come back and get the truck, sometime later. And he says, no, let's not do that to him. He says, I'll take the truck. I said, Doc, what are you gonna do with your patrol car? And he says, I got it covered. So I'm not paying any attention, right? So I let him do his thing. I finish up the paperwork with them, put them in my car. I pull out. Doc jumps into the truck and he follows us. We get to their house. We park the truck in the driveway. We get back into my car. We roll back out. Now this was nighttime. It was dark. And he had left the park lights on his car and he had locked it up, right? So as we're driving back to where his car was parked, we noticed another state police car was pulled up next to it. It was our boss, our supervisor. And I pulled around, pulled up, and he comes walking over and he could see that Doc was riding with me. And before Doc could ever get out of the car, he walks over to the side. He rolls down the window, and his name was Tommy, and he kind of dips his head into the window and he says, so, came over the hill to check on my hard-working troopers. Pulled up behind this patrol car sitting here. Walked up to say hi. And I look in the window, and there's a teddy bear staring at me. Could somebody please explain? Right? So what I didn't know is Doc, so we were issued these bears, we called them trooper bears, to give to kids that were like in trauma, right? And he had duct taped this bear to the top of the seat and put his hat on it so that it looked like somebody was sitting in the car. So when the supervisor looked in the window, he saw this bear instead of a person, and he was not happy. Now, the reason I share that story with you is because from that point on, for the next 2 years, because Doc ultimately was asked to leave the department after some other mishaps, he lost all trust with his supervisors, right? None of the supervisors ever trusted him after that. However, I trusted Doc with my life because I saw Doc through a completely different lens. I saw him as a person that every time Angie and I needed something, he was the very first person there. We spent a lot of time off work together. Now, he was much older than me at that time, but he was great at giving advice and giving help, and he was just, and not just to me, practically to any person he would meet, he would give them anything, no questions asked. So, although he had lost trust with certain people, he didn't lose it with me. And the reason is because I chose to trust him based on what I knew of him. At any given time, choice plays into trust. In other words, we choose who we trust. So, there are 3 types of people that we need to trust. And keep in mind that we're talking about simplifying our life. Well, I think one of the reasons that Pastor Matt chose trusting people as one of these topics is because the more trust we are willing to give, the more simple our life can be. But giving trust is not easy. So I've identified 3 groups of people who, at least in my life experience, I think we need to learn how to trust, right? The people that are close to us in our circles, right? Our family and friends. The people we don't know, total strangers. And then the people that we do know that have broken our trust. So we're going to talk about each of those. And we're going to start with trusting the people we know. Now, just because someone is in our circle of trust doesn't automatically mean that we trust them, right? we can trust certain family members, we can trust certain friends, but that doesn't mean that we trust everybody in a given group, right? We make individual decisions on who we trust. And right now, I'm going to invite Pastor Matt to join me so that I can have him help me with a question that I would want to pose to all of you. So, Pastor Matt, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for inviting me to my own kitchen. This is great.
I don't know that I've ever asked a question to a congregation of one, but in virtual land, that's what we have to do.
Yeah.
So, what I would like you to do is just offer some of your own personal insight as to why do you or people that you know decide to withhold trusting people? Like, what would be a couple of things that you think would be the reason that they do that?
For me, and in my, I guess, experience with people, it's two things. It's either something happened in that relationship that burned the bridge of trust, or something happened in a previous relationship, maybe even when I was a kid, that made it unsafe to trust, or made it feel like it was a mistake to trust. And then you start looking about the future and saying, I don't want that to happen again. And sometimes I mean, in myself, or I've worked with people who said, I will never let that happen again. It hurts so bad to be betrayed. It hurts so bad to be lied to. It hurts so bad to have someone take something I asked them to take care of and they ruined it, that I'm in the future, I want control. So I would say it's either because of something that person might have done directly, or because of something that happened way back that just made trust feel unsafe.
So almost like self-preservation or protection or a barrier that they're building up because they don't want to experience the pain that they experienced before.
I think that's if there was a sign on that wall, it would say self-protection, self-preservation. The pain of being disappointed by another person, or the damage that it caused in my life is not worth the risk. I think that's the reason. I'm not saying that it's true or always the best resort, but I understand and sympathize with the impulse for sure.
Okay. Thanks, Pastor Matt.
Yeah.
So, with Pastor Matt sharing his insight and his opinions on that, I'm going to share with you what some experts in psychology have mentioned in lots of writings about the reasons that people withhold trust. So number one on this list is low self-worth. Just like in order for us to really care about another individual, right, we have to care about ourselves first. And if we have a low sense of self, it becomes harder for us to trust others. The second one is sort of what Pastor Matt talked about, and that's past betrayals. When we're wronged, it's really hard for us to put ourselves in a position where we feel that wrong or that type of wrong could repeat itself, where it might happen again. The third one is adverse life experiences, where a series of events maybe happen to us, whether it was when we were in grade school or elementary school or middle school, high school, college, or some other walk in our life where a series of events happened and it was just so overwhelming that it brought us to a place where we are making a choice that, you know what, I'm just never going to trust that person again, or I'm not going to trust those people again. And then last one is actual physical or emotional trauma, where the victim of an actual assault or something like that, not only can they not trust people, but sometimes they just can't trust the world, right? So they build up a barrier, they build up a wall, and they isolate themselves. So these are the reasons that the experts tell us that trust is hard for us. But and I believe that their mental health experts and psychologists are so key to helping all of us find healing in lots of different ways. there's a supreme healer, right? That we all have access to 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and that's our Creator. So I'm going to bring us to Philippians 4, verse 8 and 9, and share this with you. It says, "Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put into practice." Now, that verse probably has different meanings to different people, obviously. I think that there are many verses in the Bible that God really intended for us to all take meaning for different things that we are needing it for. There's no two human beings on the planet that are the same, and I think the Word of God is designed that way because people are not the same. But for me, what I take away is that we are called to see the good in everything and everyone. Just like we make a choice to bring out somebody's imperfections, especially those people that are closest to us, right? That's a choice that we make. But we are called to look for the good, and sometimes to look for the reasons to trust people instead of the reasons not to, right? But it's interesting. I found that with people that we know, sometimes we put conditions on the trust. Well, I'll trust you if you do this, this, and this for me. Or I'll trust you as long as, you do this the way that I want you to do it. Those are conditions. And it's been my life experience that when you put conditions on trust, it rarely works out in the end. Because you can't separate trust from love. And when you put conditions on love, you put conditions on trust. And when we're doing that with people that are close to us in our circle of family and friends, it tends never to work out well. So we need to look for reasons to trust people in our inner circle, not distrust them. So then I want to go to our second one, right? Trusting strangers. Now, for some people, maybe this one is going to be the most difficult. But we're going to start with looking at the book of Matthew, and specifically one of my favorite verses in the Bible, Matthew 25:45. He will reply, "I tell you the truth. Whatever you did not do for the least of these, you did not do for me." Now, every time I hear that, it really sort of, I think of the easy button, right? From, Office Depot. You hit the easy button, everything resets, right? To me, every time I read this verse, it kind of resets my faith because it grounds me to looking at the fact that how we treat people that have nothing, how we treat people that come from nothing, how we treat the least of those in our society, whether they be emotionally or physically or financially the least. However we're treating them is how we're treating Jesus. And when you look at it through that lens, it sort of should, and I think it's the purpose of this verse to reset it to think, because think about it. Who is the one person that is in their corner? That's Jesus. That's the people that he came to save, which he talks about in the New Testament consistently. So I also found a lot of strength and hope I recently went through the Surprise 101 videos, and one of those videos is called Lost People Matter. And reaching out to the people that he's referencing in this verse in Matthew is part of the charter of what surprise is and who surprise is. So this is another reason why it becomes important for us to be able to trust people that we don't know. Now, when you think about what's the most difficult thing about trusting somebody you don't know, right? Different people will answer that differently. And this is when I'd like to bring Pastor Matt back in and give him a question about this.
I'm back.
He's back. So, but I wonder, would he be this willing and able to come back if we weren't actually in his kitchen? But anyway, that being said.
Everyone's wondering that.
Yeah, they're everywhere. So, Pastor Matt, what I want to ask you is why, what is it about giving trust to people that we don't know that holds people back? Like, what do you think is at stake in our own minds that if we do trust a stranger, what's the worst that could happen? Like, what do you think, how do people process that?
Well, I think maybe sometimes we start with the worst case scenario horror stories. Someone picked up a hitchhiker and never came home, or someone helped a homeless person and got mugged, or so I think there's enough headlines of bad news, bad stories that you can live with a sort of cynicism of if I open myself up to someone that I don't know, that hasn't demonstrated that I can trust them, then I'm opening up for a risk that maybe is unnecessary or unwarranted or something like that.
So you think that a lot of the events and the social things that are happening within our world right now is also contributing to people's willingness to trust people they don't know?
I think that's exactly right. If you think about the average neighborhood, and in my neighborhood, for example, it's easy to not ever talk to your neighbors. No, they haven't given me a reason not to trust them, but to knock on a neighbor's door to introduce yourself, some people are really uncomfortable with that. And it's nothing that has been earned on my end or they on their end, as much as there's a culture of bad news that I think we get so used to seeing, even if it's 1.00001% chance of it happening, there's a steady stream of bad news. It seems like it happens all the time. And so I think that's a huge reason for mistrust, is that we just hear bad stories all the time. The other reason, though, is maybe a little bit natural to relationships. You don't take a stranger and tell them your deepest, darkest secret. As a friendship develops, usually there's like, hi, let me tell you where I work. That's safe. And you tell me where you work. And then I'll tell you something about my family. And then you tell me something about your family. And maybe I'll share something about my past, and you'll share. And so there's a stairway of intimacy as you learn that it's okay to reveal this much, and that person makes it okay to reveal that much. And of course, with a stranger or someone you don't have that background with, to do something that would be farther down that trust line, it just feels like a lot more risk.
So there's probably human skills that make it easier for certain people to do that can come into play. But I believe that there also are just decisions, right? That people can choose to trust anybody that we want to. That's interesting. So thank you, Pastor Matt.
Thank you.
So trusting strangers, it comes down to, it's about us, it's not about them, right? It's about what we choose to do and how willing we are to trust other people that we don't have a background and a history with. But it falls on us. It's not about them. It's not about hoops that we feel that they should jump through in order to earn that trust. When we do it that way, there's always going to be limitations placed on who earns it. And finally, trusting those who have violated our trust. And for many people, this is probably the most difficult group. So, there's a verse out of 2 Timothy, 2 Timothy 4:16. Now, in my personal Bible, I have a bookmark, a separate bookmark that I keep on 2 Timothy. And in my Bible, I have written in giant letters right next to this verse, the words, my verse. I chose this many years ago as the verse that I look to every day to remind me of who I am. And the reason I'm going to share this verse with you is because this verse helps remind me how to trust, especially people that have broken mine. 2 Timothy 4:16, at my first offense, no one came to my support, but everyone deserted me. May it not be held against them. But the Lord stood at my side and gave me strength. As I shared my faith story not too long ago, many of you know that I had attempted suicide. And after I came through that storm, believe it or not, there was one individual, a supervisor, a former supervisor of mine, who sort of put the events in motion that ultimately landed me in the position that I was in using lies. And when I got through the other side of that, and I was sitting down going through some counseling with my my department chaplain, on the first meeting I had with him, he told me, he says, you know, Don, if you're going to move past this, you're going to have to do two things that you don't want to do. And I said, what's that? He says, number one, you're going to have to forgive him. And number two, you're going to have to trust him. And I thought, are you kidding me? Do you have any idea what this man has done to me? Right? And what he went on to explain over, a significant amount of time is that we can choose to trust and we can choose to love anyone as long as we recognize that our strength doesn't come from them and it doesn't come from what they do. It comes from God. Right? I know that he was standing beside me through that whole ordeal. And once I recognized that, the giving of the forgiveness, which was followed by trust, it came easy. And I can tell you that Angie struggled with it. She's like, I can't believe that you're forgiving him. We are called to forgive, which leads to trust. We are called to trust, which leads to love. And ultimately, it's about love. Trust is the virtue of these three things, but love is the bedrock. Right? Love is what makes trust possible. We have been given a role model on trust, and that is Jesus. He trusted people and loved them even when he knew they were going to betray him and they were going to kill him. You sort of can't get over that fact. So in closing, I'd just like to say it's okay to take emotional risk if you have faith, because we lean on God, not lean on the world. Invest time and energy in people. Learn to trust yourself. And most importantly, learn to trust God. And man, will your life become simple. Thank you all. God bless you.